Hello, I'm Cathryn Brown Ramsperger, author of The Shores of Our Souls, and welcome to my Story Hour. I created Story Hour to connect avid readers with brilliant writers. If you're one or both, you've come to the right place, and we certainly have a brilliant writer with us today. Today, it's my treat to connect all of you with lifelong author and my lifelong friend, almost lifelong, Cathryn Hankla. So, Cathryn was born in Virginia, and she's professor of English and creative writing and department chair at Hollins University. You may have heard of that school before. She teaches in the Jackson Center for Creative Writing and serves as poetry editor for the Hollins Critic. She directed the Jackson Center for Creative Writing 2008 through 12 and was named the Jackson Professor of Creative Writing 2012 through 2014. And lucky for us, Cathryn has published plenty in the last 5 years, and her publishing houses of choice have been Mercer University Press and Groundhog Press. Mercer and Groundhog. She's published 14 books in multiple genres, including Lost Places, On Losing and Finding Home, which is a memoir and essays that we'll be focusing on today, Galaxies, a poetry collection, Great Bear, another poetry collection, Fortune Teller Miracle Fish, a collection of stories, and A Blue Moon in Poor Water, which is a novel. There's much, much more. Her work has been awarded the James Boatwright III Poetry Prize, a Penn Syndicated Fiction Prize, a Virginia Commission for the Arts Grant in Poetry, and Artists Fellowship here and abroad. Like me, Kathy is a nature lover, and unlike me, she's a runner and a painter. Welcome, Cathryn Hankla.
Thank you so much, Fran, for having me on your show. I'm so excited to talk to you always. It's always a treat.
It is a treat.
To trade stories. And I'll say I'm very happy not to be chair any longer. My term ended June 30th. So happily now I am no longer chair.
So you're free to write and teach writing.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm not doing any administrative work this year, which is a relief. Yeah,
I'm sure.
I've done a lot of it, as you mentioned. So that's what we do. Whatever we're called to do in the context of our work, we have to step up and do it, which I've done that. But I'm really happy to be stepped down here.
Well, it means probably more words from you. And so that delights me and probably many, many others. And speaking of words, would you honor us by sharing a poem or two to start us off?
Sure, I would love to. And I picked out a couple. Let's see, this has been well worn.
Well, you can see. I've earmarked and written in the margins, and I have probably 10 of your books at least.
Oh my gosh! Well, yeah. You are. I don't know even what to say about that. That's amazing. So these are the sticky notes for readings that I used to be able to do. This book came out in 2017, and so I thought I would read a couple of things that kind of intersect with what we're mainly going to talk about with the memoir.
Lead us into it.
Yeah, you know, you and I are both grew up when men were racing to the moon, and kind of colored our imagination. And I don't know if you studied astronomy at Hollins or not, but I did. And remember that textbook? What was it? Physics for Poets, and then there was the astronomy book was amazing too. I still have it. But so that kind of started my wanting to, think about metaphorically and actually the place where we are in the universe.
Right. Well,
so in line with that, there's a reckoning also with your locale, right? And what that means, the baggage that you bring from the locale. So my locale was Appalachia, and my place, like yours, the universe. So anyway, here's a little poem called
Well, I think that's it.
Cedar.
I think it's Appalachia and the universe.
Yeah,
And I
back and forth, kind of talking to each other, right?
yeah.
So this poem is called Cedar, and I just want to show you what it looks like because it's kind of an odd looking little poem, if you can see that. It's in couplets, but they're really irregular.
Mhm.
And it doesn't really matter while you're listening to it, but you know, poets love form. So I like to share that.
It's pretty.
This poem, oddly, did appear in Appalachian Heritage first before it was in this book. So it's kind of funny. So Cedar. To hail from nowhere is a resonant gift. It means you can be anywhere. It means I can be here. Saw through the curved branch, fibrous bark, sinew wrapped as wisteria vine, and unseal the waft that will knock you down. It sent a stain of blood, insect proof, divinely inspired. To work with hands a length of life into a shape of use is no small thing. My connections fail. The wood stuns me with its power, even in dying. This, if I'll just kind of slow down for a minute and say something about some of the imagery in that poem, Cedar. You know, as you know, cedar is just really, really common. But the poem came about from walking the grounds at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, which is a wonderful retreat center across from Sweetbriar College. And after a storm that was really fierce, and a cedar tree had been just cut into by a lightning strike. And it was split open, and you could see that amazing red color inside to the heart of the cedar trunk. And it was so shocking. It was like the tree had been laid bare like a person and was bleeding. It was just unbelievably, just like, wow, there's the heart of something that I don't really pay much attention to. It's just part of the background. So anyway, that's why that poem came about. And
When it's that drastic, it it really gives us pause, and that is when a poet writes a poem or an
well,
art.
when the world wrote the poem. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, might be just grabbing those moments that are
Mhm.
laid in front of you is all it's about. But
Mhm.
so it's funny, I didn't realize until this moment that I picked out two poems from this book that are that both came from that same landscape. And I must have written the drafts while I was doing a residency. And they don't appear anywhere near each other in the book. But anyway, funny.
Well,
I just recognized that.
it
There are
makes
these patterns everywhere.
sense. Yeah. Yeah.
So I wrote this poem, Bee Tree, when I was worried about colony collapse.
Mhm.
And I happened to be taking a long walk over the countryside, and I came across this tree that had a hollow in it, pretty low on the tree. And I realized that bees were going in and out of this tree. And then I realized that it was a dead tree and they were using it as their headquarters. So that this together, that little miracle of seeing bees and then, you know, knowing about colony collapse and being worried about it kind of, but because this poem appears in the book Galaxies, it's also about those connections between very small things like bees and very big things like where we are in this universe. So,
My brother keeps bees.
oh, really? Have you ever suited up?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, he wouldn't have let me get by without doing that.
Oh, I can see you
Put
in
all kinds of things in
beekeepers.
bed with me at night. So yeah, he's doing a really good job. It's hard work to keep them all thriving.
And where does he keep them?
He's in South Carolina and got some acreage, not like a lot, but his backyard. So
Well, I see bees here in just people's side yards in the city. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of
no,
space for
they
bees.
don't need space. They need the attention right now, which they're getting, and hopefully it's enough.
Hmm. Hmm. I
All right.
think when I wrote this poem, it was a little iffier than it is now about, recovery. So,
Well, still iffy, but it's getting a little better.
yeah.
So I'm going to really enjoy this, having suited up.
Okay. Okay, everybody suit up. Bee tree. A bee colony, black hole in a split juniper trunk, gnarled, rough mounds of bark guard a slash of buzzing dark. Wild bees delight, work and hover, dive into an artificial night. They pass each other to cover cones with stolen nectar. This could be the last bee tree in a food chain of cultivated colonies. Bee homebodies thrive, imports mingle without improvement, and migrants sicken, shipped on flatbeds cross country. No swarm, only purposeful acts and a day-long dance to and fro. The gash of the hive is low on the trunk, the whole secret 2 feet high. This fur bearing cones like shrunken blueberries with bark striations of whitish gray resembles a faded fence post more than a living tree. Inside, there is a kingdom waiting to collapse on a queen so plump with life she cannot see the danger of such sweetness. Expanding honey cores the juniper as sinkholes honeycomb the comet's nucleus until it cries out, its coma burning bigger than Jupiter. 17P Holmes explodes gas and dust as sun strikes it. To the eye, a fuzzy spot enlivens Perseus. To the lazy bees, tucked into a moonlit tree, it is nothing. Soon, it is nothing.
Thank you.
So I may have written that poem so that I could say Juniper and Jupiter in the same poem.
I think there were some other reasons um, that I am. My age shows that I can't listen to something and quote it back, but um, it's a poem so full of life and so full of death. And
Yeah, I really write poems that need to be reread, I think.
mhm,
Yeah.
they do, they do, and I do reread them. Um, so, thank you for that. I wanted to share with my little audience the depth and breadth of what you've done in your writing career, just a little smidgen. And I didn't want it to be all about this book. And it was also tough, and I told you this, to come up with um, a short amount of questions because
Oh,
you
I think you did a great job.
will
I
think
doubt if we can answer them all. We probably won't get to them all.
it's okay. I never want to be at a loss for the questions. Um, but I'm going to start with our first meetings, our literary roots, and extend them outward um, into an arbor that hopefully encompasses your writing but focuses on lost places. And the reason Lost Places is recent, but it's also my favorite book of yours. And I reread some of the essays this month, and the audience, I told them that I was going to have to narrow it down to social justice books and books about social issues and books about the world at large. But this is that and more. And I want everybody to know that you have a beautiful way of going outward into the universe and pulling it in again into the heart core almost. And that's the reason I love this book. Um, so, your subtitle is On Losing and Finding Home, a theme in my own life. Can you speak to all the different versions of home and houses you write about? There's more than one in each essay, but um, what would you say about losing home and finding it again, having written the book?
I think, thank you so much for the question. I mean, the subtitle of the book really is important to it, the cyclical nature, and which I think readers may at first think it's on a home that was lost and then finding another home. But then you realize in reading the book that it's really about that cycle of losing and finding that is not complete, that we cycle through belonging, sense of belonging, a sense of feeling like we don't belong, asking the question over and over again in our lives, do I feel at home? Am I at home here? Uh, in this relationship, in this place, in this friendship, in this marriage, all these ways in which we keep getting settled and unsettled over and over in our lives. And there isn't a destination called home. There is a longing for it, which I realized when I was writing that it wasn't about arrival. It was about that restlessness that always enters in as soon as we become comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I've thought about that a lot in trying to come to terms with that as a fact, right? Because you can pretty much count on, as soon as you make things perfect for you, something will disrupt it, right? We're living a disrupted life right here, right now, and it just picked us up, and it will land us where it will.
and and hopefully we'll find wherever that is soon. I think that most of the time we it's the longing for the home that it's the yearning for the home that moves us forward, and then it's departure from home, at least in my own life, that leaves me with the greatest lesson, maybe, or at least it's hard hitting those departures.
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting, these patterns that we create that are being broken now in all kinds of ways. But when we were leaving for college, that is like the first marker of adulthood is you're leaving home, right?
Right.
Um, and that was just a pretty firmly established pattern for folks who went to college and for people who didn't. They needed to leave home. They needed to either get an apartment and a job, or they needed to find a college and go to it and not be living at home. And that it's the pattern of staying at home and studying has come up since in more recent times.
It's a tough time for having kids that age. It's a tough time because their plans get diverted and they'll learn a lot through it.
Yeah, yeah.
But
But the whole idea of venturing out physically in space is so important to maturing,
mhm,
testing yourself against new situations, I guess is what it's about, being able to, navigate
mhm.
that kind of thing that marks a passage to adulthood.
Well,
That you can't really replace that with thought. You have to do it.
it's true. It's true. You have to learn by doing in that case. At least I did. Boy, did I learn a lot. um, uh, and as a college professor, you must see a marked difference in this year. But so, as far as our time at Hollins and the years intervening, I think like a lot of Hollins alums, because it's a really close knit community, even if we don't talk. And I pulled this magnet because I realized how many magnets were all over my fridge about home. I'm not expecting you to read this because,
Yes.
but
Good
that
friends
one
of
good friend
stars.
of stars, you can't always see them, but they're there, and that's part of the home too for me.
Yes,
Um,
definitely.
I followed you, and I've always been pleased and grateful, and somewhat astonished sometimes that you followed me. Um, and I'm interested in talking about how you've dug deep and I've gone broad. I mostly tell the stories of others, and I think you've gone inside and told your story in like the facets of a diamond. Like, let's look at it this way now. Let's look at it this way, almost a scientific way in places. Do you think you made one locale home, and obviously lots of different places around that, and you traveled extensively to dig deep? Did you know that's what you were doing? Do you think it's what you were doing?
I don't know. It just seems like two routes to the same place to me. Like,
Mm,
it's one way or the other. You've got to interface with yourself and others. You can start with others and come back to the self, start with the self and go out to others. But I mean, there's still going to be that interface between who you are and how you're formed by those experiences.
mm,
I came across this word over the weekend, stratigrapher, which
mm.
refers to a geographer, a geologist, rather, who goes deep into the strata
Right.
uh, and looks at like strata of the land to think about deep time, and that is geologic time, right? So, I mean, there is that aspect to what I do where I'm looking at not deep time so much as psychic ruptures and layers. So maybe I'm more like a core sampleist. Go in and get a core sample and see what's here.
Love that analogy. I love it. And I think that anybody that wants to live a good life would do well to do a little of it. Because I would have said spelunker, but tell me the name again. Tell me the
That's
name
funny.
again. Geological name.
Well, the stratigrapher,
Stratigrapher.
as in from strata and graph, stratigrapher.
What a beautiful word.
So yeah, I just happened to run across that. I was reading an article in Orion magazine, one of my favorite magazines, and ran across that word. But yeah, I've used that caving, that spelunker image a lot, and I don't know if you read The Land Between, but that has a lot to do with that spelunking
Mhm.
imagery. Of course, it came up again in Lost Places, uh, where
Oh, where
in
it's so,
the essay that you like the most, the Invisible Cities one, there's that juxtaposition between the underground world and then the church spiral. So there's that reflective nature of what's below and what's above.
mhm.
Um, but I do think that imagery, essentially, it kind of came out of reckoning with coal mining for me. It had a very practical source.
I was going to say, geographically, it makes sense that you would write a lot about that kind of thing.
And, it was just
Everywhere.
because I love the natural world. I love like the image on the book. I took that picture in Chaco in
I
New
knew that for
Mexico.
some reason. I don't know whether you told me or I could just tell because
Well,
I've been
it's
to Chicago.
the
Did you know?
color of the rock. It's so like rosy and yellow. I mean, that is just unique there. It's got to be there. But I do find myself with these very literal metaphors that then become more figurative over time. I wrote that book, A Blue Man in Pour Water, when I was not yet 30. And to try to think about that place that, of course, I left the coal mining town when I was 10 years old. And in reflection, I began to understand it a lot better. When you're a kid, you're a kid. Your parents are your world and your family and your friends. You don't really think about that so much, even though it was radical, different place. Over time, I realized it more. But that image of, because that part of Southwest Virginia and Tazewell County had some of the deepest pit mines in the world there. So it wasn't the strip mining, but the deep pit mines that kind of formed my imagination around that. So we had of course, in that book, I used the moonshot kind of juxtaposed against the deep pit mining, and I think that's something about that seems like you go inward to go to connect with the divine, right? You go inward for that. You don't go out, you go in. So
I've
you
often
gotta,
wondered how people thought it was outside because it seems so natural to me that it's inside me.
mhm,
And
mhm.
then, well, um, I love our conversations.
Me
Um,
too.
so you make connections and I love it because I used to think everybody made these connections when I was young, but it's actually quite rare between similar and seemingly similar things that and make them dissimilar and then make them similar again.
Mhm.
And um, I wanted to ask you if you think Hollins started you on that road, or was it something that you always did as a child?
I I have a lot of thoughts about this actually, but so I'll try to organize them a little bit. But I do think one thing that may just be creativity itself is about connecting things,
Mhm.
about finding connection in dissimilar things. And you and I both, learned what a metaphor was. One thing becomes another. It's about transformation, right? Um, so we delight in metaphors because there is that transformation.
Mm.
So there's that. I think it is the creative mind. It's what the creative mind wants to do. And you see this in all kinds of disciplines, that people won't stay in their field if they're creative. They combine different fields. One thing, take one thing here and one thing there, and it becomes a new thing. It's what inventors do too. But I also do think that we were so enriched by just the old idea of the liberal arts education, that you studied across disciplines,
Mhm.
and you were taking, in our case, not 5, but 4 courses at once, and they weren't similar usually.
True.
And so your mind would try to make sense of this. So it's kind of natural to try to, like, how do these things kind of work together, and or how do I, get from here to there.
I always say Hollins taught me how to think.
Well,
Pretty.
I do think that liberal arts education, where you're not doing one thing,
Mhm.
creates a sense of possibility in people that a more focused education does not.
Right. Right.
More technical or more focused education maybe doesn't yield up those opportunities as readily.
I agree. And I hope they stick around for much longer.
I do too, because there's so much focus now on the outcome of education being kind of a predetermined job. And that just gets in the way of the education, I think.
It really does. It really does. So, on to this particular book, more in depth. I told you you've interwoven these essays with a fine gossamer thread um, to quote, to explore, quote, the cycle between belonging and longing for belonging. And you write about many different kinds of houses. We've talked about that. And I know you told me that you could have kept writing. And I'm just wondering if you've written about home since. Have you written a poem about home? It seems to be a theme for you.
Well, I have uh, gone back to it in poetry, and I may go back to it in other ways. I'm working on something that now that may be a memoir about reading the Bible. And I find that the theme of home is cropping up in different ways in that. But one of the things I was trying to work with in Lost Places was not just home, but presence. So one of the things I did that made it kind of difficult for me, but also more inevitable about where it would end, was to weave my life, my daily life, into the book. And it happens more in the latter part of the book, when caring for my aging mother becomes woven into the book, because I wanted to come back to the body as our home. This is our first home, our mom and our bodies, right? It's hard to even, and there was no difference at the very beginning. No difference. Mom is home. And so reckoning with that bodily home is, it resonates through everything. It's Mother Earth. It's um, coming back to the presence that we have in the moment. And I found that the greatest gift of caring for my mother was slowing down into that presence. And once I got over trying to resist what was happening to me, I received the gift. And I tried to weave that into the book, like
You did.
in a way that maybe people could grab hold of. But, not with preciousness, but with humor. As my mother said, I'm a lot of things, but I'm not sweet. And it's so funny she said that because I think so many people thought she was sweet, but then she just came out with that one. I'm a
Love
lot of things, but I'm
her.
not
You write
sweet.
of her as though she were sweet. Like, maybe not sweet, kind. Wasn't she kind?
Kind, very kind. And I don't even know why she said that. It was so shocking to me when she said it. I was like, I think older people who have their wits get really tired of being infantilized by the help who are just trying to be nice. But it would really irk my mother to be called sweetie and honey and all that stuff. So it kind of erodes dignity a little bit for
That
people who are with it.
I I don't like it myself, and I'm not at that stage quite yet. But it I love the scene where you come in and she's on the floor. Because first of all, I had a mom that was always falling and wouldn't stay still. But so I could really empathize with you walking in and there she is. But say what she said. That's what I wanted you to do. Do you remember what she said? Oh, it was something like, I'm so useless. Is that what she said?
Yeah, yeah.
And I felt like when I read that was some of the most profound words coming out of an aging person's mouth, because it was so obvious in that moment she was anything but to me. And um, I loved the irony of it, and I love the irony of and juxtaposition that you write with as well. Um,
Thank you.
and nowhere is it greater in this book, in my opinion, than when you're talking about your mom. And anybody that's been a daughter, mom, sister, even sister, brother, knows that they are our learning curve, and they're some of the most profound lessons that we can find. And there's nothing worse than being useful and thinking you're not too. So there was that part of it as well.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm. Yeah, that transition from the human doing to the human being is rough on people. They don't realize the gifts that they give by being present.
well, the being is the whole profundity of it all for them and us. We
Mhm.
have to slow down. We have to notice the detail. From maybe my favorite essay you've ever written, and for anybody that has the book, it begins on the bottom of page 217, and it starts with an Oscar Wilde quote from The Picture of Dorian Gray. I've got a couple of listeners that will enjoy that reference. The true mystery of the world is the visible, not the invisible, is what he wrote. I wonder how we can hope to understand much more about the visible world without our enthusiasms erasing its mysteries. As my breath in the hypogeum, am I pronouncing that right? Hypogeum?
Yeah, that's right.
Serves to destroy it. I'm drawn to sites called ruins, not merely because entertainment remains scarce on the three tiny isles of Malta, but also because I'm pulled to points that serve as passageways, portals into the sacred. I may be walking a labyrinth of devotion mapped out for me step by step. If so, I am blind to it, an amnesiac of any grand scheme. And yet, 3 years after spending my month of Maltese exile, courtesy of the St. James Center for Creativity, with my mind drifting to New Mexico. I love that part. I open an article on Chaco culture written by a noted archaeologist who serves up a comparison photo of the temple of Manadra. I think that's right. The coastal Maltese site I visited twice. Double take. I remember standing among gigantic slabs of stone, reflecting on the question of why I was occupying that particular space at that time, standing there as in alive. A second trip to the oracle's chamber yielded no further clarification. Time's layers intersect with me in these places. I feel empty in the edifice, baffled and silenced by the scale of the construction and its age relative to the human body. I run through all my words and want to find more technical expressions to extend the vocabulary of reverence, of hot sun, cool light, and the deep, gorgeous blue Mediterranean sparkling below this high cliff temple. Connections are all I have and am. Thank you. Thank you, Cathryn, for writing that paragraph.
It was so nice to hear you read it.
Well, it's my honor, and I loved reading it. So, do you have any comments on that? Or it just speaks for itself, doesn't it?
One thing that I keep returning to in the book are these moments in which you kind of drop into yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I, wrote about that in Chaco, wrote about that at that moment, and then that connection between the temple sites in New Mexico, same period of time on Malta, some of the oldest man-made ruins in the world are there on Malta. But that was just like the background of like this kind of vibrational feeling of humanity, layers of humanity, time, and how we hold all of this in ourselves, right? Our timelines are so small. Every one of our timelines are just minuscule in comparison to the God line, the DNA line, and the timeline, of humanity is just overwhelming at times. And yet it seems like the presence that these places hold allow me to feel more alive and bigger, not smaller. So there's that oscillation between feeling like overwhelmed and in awe, struck by awe, and then also realizing that you can contain the awe, that you're part of the awe. So it kind of moves back and forth between, being the observer of this and the cataloger and the digestive agent, and then also just realizing that you can't separate yourself from it, you're part of it.
That gives me chills because that was such a beautiful explanation of writing. That moving in and moving out again and observing and then I'm going back in.
Putting on the hard hat, going in. Yeah. One thing I struggled with in this book was kind of creating the persona of the voice writing the book, which is always me and not me. It's a memoir and it's my life, but it's also highly constructed and arranged. Mm-hmm. Even the parts that I pulled from my mundane everyday life, because that was one of the problems I set myself, because I wanted it to be not all remembered, but happening as well, that sense of out of control like, how do I incorporate this thing into what I'm writing? And making those discoveries as I went seemed to me to make the experience of writing much more alive. I wanted to be in that place of discovery, not that place of already knowing what it was I was going to write and why.
Have you ever known what you were going to write before you wrote it?
Yeah, I know, no, but I think sometimes people have the idea of a memoir, like it's remembered, it's already happened. So you kind of know what you need to know about it. And I guess I just wanted to make it clear that in the timeline, the multiple timelines, which are, I'm sure, a little confusing for the reader. But,
Me. Then I have that kind of brain. But I love the multiple timelines.
oh, thank you. That makes me feel a lot more secure in the choice.
Well, I think, um, well, I have a spiritual belief that that's what happens all the time anyway.
Yeah.
We're always moving in and out. Perhaps not of lives or anything, but of possibilities of this could happen if I went in door A, or this could happen if I went in door B, and maybe I did go in door B. And what would have happened if I had gone in door C, you know?
Yeah. And they're all possible, right? They're all um, there.
Well, that's why I love this book, and that's why I love that particular passage, which summed it up really well for me. So we've talked a little bit about our mutual love of nature and our it wasn't my first home. I felt a little bit more disconnected in the Roanoke Valley than natives, but um, I think it's a bit of a spiritual home for me. I always come back.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I'm wondering if nature is a home to you, or is it a compass? I know.
Probably for all of us, we realize that nature is something that's fragile, that we are disrupting it as we look at it, right? We're go into it, we become kind of melded with it, which changes it. It's looking back at us, and it's something that has cropped up in some poetry when one realizes that the natural world or creatures are actually pivoting and looking at humans. It's a scary thing, right? We're no, to realize you're not necessarily the subject, you might be the object of nature. So I
Well,
like those moments where we're not, you know, the observer, we're the observed, which is that hiccup in the system in which we always put ourselves in the center. So I like to write about nature in a way that reminds people that it's its own world. Nature is its own world. We're just part of it. We're not in charge of it. I think one of the gifts of this time that we're in terms of the cessation of travel, air travel, people staying home, all these things, are these crazy cleansings of nature. I don't know if you all saw the images of the dolphins returning to the Venice canals and all this crazy stuff. I mean, it's like nature really interacts with us, but on some level has very little use for us.
well, they're highly tolerant, you know, because that one dolphin that I saw a picture of, I almost heard it saying, "Thank God they've left."
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like I've been wanting to come up this canal for ages.
Mhm.
And finally, here I am. I'm so happy. But I do think too that, you know, just design of nature is just amazing. We're just beginning, I think, to understand our own brains, right? the fractal experience is something that fascinates me. And I guess I write a lot about how the small, reflects the large, that it's all present in everything you look at closely. You don't have to, I mean, I love a road trip and I love international travel as much as anyone. But you don't really have to do all that. You just have to witness and behold the things in front of you to start figuring out how you relate to things. But for Roanoke is an interesting place. I didn't grow up here, but I've lived here a long time, and it is a bowl. It's a valley in a bowl of mountains at the bottom of the Shenandoah Valley, the Great Valley of Virginia. We're not really part of it. We're sort of at the bottom of it. And Roanoke's sort of like the hinge between the Shenandoah Valley and the western part of the state, where the economies and everything are a lot more disadvantaged. And Roanoke is sort of like in between, right? So I learned at a certain point that the geography, the topography of Roanoke being in this bowl of mountains is very similar to Taos in New Mexico, except for the altitudes involved, right? Around here, the highest mountain is like 3,200 feet. Right. And there we're talking about 7,500 feet to 8,000. But the relationships are so similar. You've got the valley and you've got the mountain surrounding. Mm-hmm. And I think there's something about that is difficult to get in and out of. Like, and I'll say a couple of things about that. Like when people fly into the Roanoke Valley, the pilot is always very awake, right? Because it's one of those airports that's difficult for pilots because they have to do like this, over the mountain and kind of straight down and then land. So it's usually a rough landing here.
Yes, it is.
It's like a couple of hops, unless you get a really good pilot, right? So that's one thing. But it also feels somewhat protected because we've got these soft old hills around us. And something that always strikes me when I get back home, particularly in the summer or the spring, early fall, is how incredibly green it is. Oh my God, it's so green. So there's that softness that feels like these old hills, not these rugged, tall hills, jagged, but these old soft hills, like soft shoulders. So there's that aspect to it that feels very enveloping. But there's also the aspect of small-mindedness, that happens in places that are kind of protected. And so Roanoke has had to grow up really quickly. In the last 25 years, Roanoke's become a very different place than it was when we were in school here. When we were in school here, it was still like, it was at the tail end of being an industrial railroad town and kind of Wild Westy. Right. Downtown was not that safe, kind of, all this stuff. And now we've transitioned into a biotech hub. We're a, research one, we're, med school and medicine is the biggest industry now. So, that we're at the juncture of medicine and technology now. And that's brought a lot of different mindset and different people into this place. So it's quite different now than it was when we were in school. I don't think we even went into Roanoke very much, did we? We didn't leave the campus.
Well, I did that. Very strange 4 years.
Well, I did too, but a lot of people never left.
Yeah, it's very true.
They just stayed on the Hollins campus under the mountain, and I mean that's a great experience too. But yeah.
The world is. I could not have imagined it as it is when I was 18. Definitely not when I was 8. I remember getting a Cracker Jack box and pulling it out, one of those little toy things, but it was a book, a little tiny mini book, and
Oh, I
it
love those. I love those.
I did too, and it said it was all these things that were going to happen in 19. It's whenever I was 40. I don't know, maybe the year 2000, but I would be over 40 in 2000. And one of the things it said was, "We'll eat our food in pills," and I was like, "What?"
Ew.
So here we are. We're finally realizing that's not the way to do it,
Uh, yeah.
but most of it came true. But it's almost unimaginable, and I think, what's the world going to be like? What is the Roanoke Valley going to be like in 40 more years? 50 more years, another century. It's quite amazing, the change that the world's undergone.
Well, the
And
one thing I worry about, Kathy, is I don't want every place to be like every other place.
I don't either. And something that I'm sad about is that I'm realizing that the accents aren't there anymore.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, and people erase themselves in, I don't know whether it just happens from exposure, more and more exposure, or the way certain accents have always been ridiculed and others treated like they're not accents.
Mhm.
But I just want to push back on that.
Me too.
And yeah,
Me too.
definitely want to
Let's
push
do
back on that. Let's do.
Because there's nothing like listening to a writer, no matter where they're from, on a recording, reading from their work, and hearing their voice.
I
It's,
know, and you don't want it to sound like a newscaster. You really don't.
you don't.
No.
Yay, we agree. So a little bit on your craft, because we're going to have to wind down soon, but I've always wondered this, and I wonder about every writer I know. How do you choose what to write? Does it appear? Do you mull it over? Is it just like a download?
Yeah, it's funny you said that download thing because, yeah, sometimes it is kind of a download. I got one of those last night about something which it's too raw to talk about, but sometimes that does happen. It's like, oh, what's that? Um, but other things come out more organically. You formulate a relationship to ideas through reading and through life and exploring things you love. And my my issue is not so much, the subject matter, but the genre. And I do think, there's a relationship there, that there's certain things that are possible in one genre and maybe not another. And
Do you know which it is when it comes to you?
yeah, I do. And I can't tell you how I know either. But I think Lost Places was one of the sneakiest books
Mm,
because it was really written over a long period of time, but then it was concentratedly written over about 3 to 5 years. So I had to, smooth it together because there were some things that had come early that made me realize I was writing about the subject of home, which,
mhm.
I didn't really realize I was writing about this subject. So it can be sneaky like that too. Like you just go toward things you're interested in and you're like, you never back away from them to realize, wow, look what's here. So that was a book like that, which doesn't often happen, but that was a new lesson of like, I don't know what I'm writing about. And there it is, right?
It's wonderful when that kind of magic happens, though. And unfortunately, it happens to me a lot. That's why I'm so slow. That's why I haven't published a lot, because I uh, I just published something I wrote at Hollins.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
a review, and not just published, but a couple of years ago. because I finally realized what it was about. And I changed a couple sentences and it
There
went.
you go. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. We're kind of the last to know sometimes.
It's really true. I love that you said that because people will probably go, especially new writers, because they think that that somebody like you would just know, and all writers, they imagine we just sit down at the keyboard and it's like a grand
Oh,
symphony.
yeah. Play it like the piano, right? No. I think writers write to discover. They don't write because they know things. At least not literary writers. Don't write because they know things. They write to discover things.
I totally agree. Often, my very self is why I'm writing, to discover myself because I don't understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. Um, well, we talked about irony and juxtaposition, and we talked a little about travel and how it how books can help us travel through time and through space and within ourselves. Um, so I'd like to talk a little bit about literary fiction because we're both lovers of it. Um, and I heard you say on another interview the slow burn of literary fiction. I love that. Um, I've been working with a student or a client, I don't know which it is, and teaching her about narrative arc and how the character and her motivations need to drive the story forward and not vice versa. Um, and I'm wondering what, in your opinion, about literary fiction leaves a reader thinking about the book long after it ends, because I think that's the highest compliment. Even if it's a negative review, if the reviewer says, but I'm still thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
what is it about literary fiction that does that?
Well, yeah, we could talk another hour about this, I know, but I mean, one of the things that I think makes literary fiction different from genre or purely entertaining fiction is that it creates an experience, a reading experience that is not transparent to a plot. And so you're involved not just in the events, but in the language of the book.
Mhm.
So that's kind of what I think goes on is that the writing itself becomes the experience for the reader. Whereas in other kinds of things that we read, the words are pretty much kind of transparent to what they're presenting to us.
Right,
So the words vanish and we follow
right,
the plot, the article, whatever it is. Like we're reading for information or we're reading to follow that unfolding, the story. But a lot of other things are coming together in literary fiction. We're also reading to follow the story of the language,
mm,
how we interact with language, how this writer refreshes the medium that's so available to everyone, but to this writer, it becomes a new thing. When I read this writer, I'm encountering language in a totally new landscape of language, and if I connect with that, then it is opening like a new facet to me, even a new world to me.
right.
So I think that's what it is. It's like literary fiction furnishes this like encounter space between
Mm,
us and the language that we live in, and yet we don't use it like this, right? So there's that.
I, I would say just briefly that we don't use enough words anymore, and um, I hope that literary fiction lives long and hard because you must have the right group of words in order to evoke something. And you're so brilliant at it. So I think we've covered just about everything and anything. And I'd love for you to tell us what you're up to next and where people can find you right now during concluding COVID and if you have any plans after. And then uh, I just know you're going to leave my audience wanting more because there are a bunch of us writers here that are going to love everything that you've said about writing.
Oh, well, you make it all possible. And we always have great conversations going back years and years. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you like this. Be better over, a glass of wine, but it's
I totally agree.
pretty good right here, right now. You know me, I have a lot of things. I always have a lot of books going at once, a lot of ideas going at once. I kind of go from pots on the stove, uh, one's on the back burner, front burner. So I have this book of poems completed that's in press now at Mercer. It's called Not Xanadu.
Mm.
And in this book of poems, I was trying to work with the way the past seeps in to our present moments. And how, I guess, who was it, Faulkner, who said the past isn't dead, the past isn't even over, or something like that. Something like that, Faulkner said. But yeah, the way in which we're kind of always encountering kind of these past things in the present, and even down to I did a couple of cento in the book, which is, using the words of others and rearranging them into a poem. I use words from Patrick Henry from a couple of his speeches where he's talking about the dangers of a despotic government, warning about that. So I'm interested in that, on the personal level, on the national level in that book. So Not Xanadu, that doesn't come out until next spring. So that's finished. I'm also working on a book of, another book of prose poems. I did one, I usually slip a few prose poems into a book of poems, but the last book that was entirely prose poems was 20 years ago, Texas School Book Depository. So I have a book of those that's about finished, and that's called Immortal Stuff. So I've got a few more kind of thoughts to go in that, but so working on that is about finished. And then I have this memoir of reading the Bible that I'm working on, which would probably be a long project, I think. I'm in my third year now of reading the Bible, the whole thing. And it's something that I got from my mother, and finally decided to dive into that 3 years ago. And I read the Bible straight through, this Christian Bible straight through 2 years in a row. And now I'm reading a different plan where you kind of start in 4 different places and you wind up, I don't know where you wind up, but anyway, I'm engaged on that. But it made me confront a lot of things in the Bible that I had either ignored, didn't know, or that had been used against me. So I'm trying to kind of write about
Amazing
those.
how many people say the Bible says one thing and it says something completely
It
opposite.
said something completely different. I know. And, I just felt like I had to dig into that,
Mm.
deal with the patriarchal messages, the homophobic messages. And then also can just kind of thinking about the book as an intertextual experience, because when you read the whole thing, you realize how quotey it is. It's all woven together. The New Testament quotes the Old, and the Old, projects into the New, and it's all tied together in a really interesting way.
I'm fascinated, and I wish I could read the whole Bible in its first form, because I think you could learn a lot about writing and the telling of story if you could compare to.
Yeah. And I'm not reading the Apocrypha.
Right,
I'm just reading what was left. I'm reading what came down to us. But even, the books are written in different languages originally. They're not all, some of it's Aramaic, some Hebrew, Greek. It's all mixy from the start. So at any rate, I'm interested in that. And that's going to probably take a really long time. I'm just not going to,
huge.
yeah, I have to write little parts of it when I feel inspired to do it. So that's going to be going on for a while. And then I have some ideas for fiction. So we'll see.
Okay, see, get ready, everybody. More books. And I always end with tea bag wisdom. It's not my tea bag, it's Yogi's. And I don't expect you to.
Love those. I have them too. The yogi tea.
I love yogi tea. I'm going to show you, but if we give happiness to others, we will end up happy. That's a very positive one. Sometimes they're more cryptic, but
Yeah.
I think that's you certainly make a lot of people happy.
I hope so. My tea bag today was about spreading love. So let's do
Ah,
that.
spreading love and spreading happiness. What better thing could we be doing right now
I
as we
know.
talk to each other?
Yeah. Well,
And
it was so nice to talk to you about art and life.
same, I would do it any day of the week, Kathy. And in closing, I just want to say thank you for being here today. Um, Later this week on Thursday, please join me for story time on my coaching Facebook page at 4 p.m. You'll meet Ruthie Landis, her coaching methods, and her books full of wisdom. She is a pulpwood queen times 3. And for my April story hour, I'm chatting with another pulpwood queen. More to come on that. You can find all my story hours archived on my author page on Facebook. You can find all my story times archived, including this one, on Ground One Coaching Facebook page, should you miss an episode. And I have them all on my YouTube channel. And I told you where to find Kathy, and you can find me at shoresofourSouls.com. And thanks again, Kathy. This is Kathy Ramsperger from Shores of Our Souls, bidding you a good weekend and a great book to read.